Okay, good evening, Rabbi. Tonight we're going to discuss two very important topics. One is rising for whoever you have to rise for. Who do you have to rise for? You have to rise for people who are the honorable people of the community. Who are we talking about? Number one, your parents, who are supposed to be honored by you and your family. You have to honor them, as it says in the Ten Commandments, right? Kabed et avicha ve'imecha. You have to honor your parents. That's number one. Number two, also, we have to rise, as it says in the Pasuk. Uh, where is this? In Baikra Yutet 19, Leviticus. It says over there two things, right? So you have to, it says two things. One is Seva. What does Seva mean? Rise before Seva. Seva, literally in Hebrew, it means a person who's aged, right? Senior citizen. A person who's already up in the years. And then it says Zaken. Right? Zaken is also a person who's aged. So why do you have to say the same thing twice? This is the question, right? So therefore the Chazal say, one is talking about one who is old in years, and the other one is talking about somebody who is old, not old, he could be young, but he has wisdom. He has wisdom of Torah. So you have to rise for him as well. So these are the three things that the Torah commands us to rise for these people. The parents, number one. Number two, the rabbis, the chachamim. And number three, for the elders. Right? So let's talk about a little bit the details regarding this. So the idea, by the way, there is a mistaken notion that people have regarding this, which a lot of people, you see that they make a mistake. The mistake is that instead of, when they see somebody like this, they know they have to rise for them. Instead of rising all the way, they do like this little, half job, like they seem to be like stuck to to the chair. They can't get up. So they do like a halfway job.
I've seen it.
They don't want to get up all the way. But the truth is, right, that the Torah requires us, if you look in the Shulchan Aruch, if you look in the Poskim, you have to rise totally, all the way up to your standing position, to your erect standing bodily position. That's the way you have to get up. So the question is, does that apply anywhere? You should get up only part of the way. We're going to discuss that. But for all these three things that we talked about, whether it's your parents, whether it's it's a rabbi, a chacham, tamid chacham, or somebody who is elder, right? The question is, what does it mean elder? What's the age that a person becomes an elder according to the Torah? So the truth is that in the Shulchan Aruch we find from the Gemara, he brings that we're talking about the age of 70. Once a person reaches the age of 70, a person has to rise before him. What kind of person are we talking about? We're talking about a regular Jew, not somebody who's very learned or whatever. But a person who's God-fearing, somewhat. He has some fear of God, he keeps Shabbat, he keeps mitzvot. He's not a big chacham. He's not like that, but you have to rise for him because of the age. Now, why is the age, we have to understand, right? Why does the age require a person to stand for him? Just because you're older than me, I have to stand for you? What's the logic behind that? Do you have any idea what the reason why we should do that? I'm asking you. Well, so you know what the logic is? The logic is that when a person gets older, he becomes wiser, He attains wisdom from all the experience that he had in his life. He went through that, he went through this, right? He went through bankruptcy, he went through divorce, right? He went through, right, all kinds of things, all kinds of crises in life.
And by the time you learned how to do things the right way, it's too late.
It's too later. Exactly. Very good. Very good. You understand very well. So the point is, right, that once that person has attained all that wisdom, now he knows how to live, better in life. He knows how to avoid all the pitfalls in life. You know what I mean? So because of that, you have to rise for him, because to show respect for his wisdom that he's attained. A person who's at that age already has wisdom, definitely, Even though he's not a Torah scholar, he's not a chacham, but he has wisdom of experience, exactly, right. Life wisdom. That's what it is. So this is the reason why I have to get up for him. By the way, this goes so far. What about for a goy, let's say, right? Let's say he's 70 years old. You have to stand up for a goy? That's the question, right? Good question. So the truth is, right, that in the Shulchan Aruch we find like this. It says in the Yorodea, Shulchan Aruch, you have to give also some honor to elder goy as well. you don't have to stand for him, but there's two things that it says to do for him, right? One is to treat him with respect. What does that mean? Like say, sir, oh, Mr., like so-and-so, right? Mr. Johnson, how are you? Sir, how are you, sir? Give him a little bit respect, the way you speak to him. Don't speak to him like he's your friend.
Mr. Biden.
Not that one. That one you ask him, you don't tell him that. You know what you tell him, right? Where are we? Can you answer a few questions? Where are we? Right? What day of the week is it? Right? Which year are we in? Right? Which state are we in? What position are you running for?
And you know what he'll say? Hey man, are you serious, man?
Come on, man.
Come on, man. Come on, man. You know what day it is, man.
All right, that's the idea. Okay, so as we said, right, even for a goy, give him respect. Number one, tell him, sir, Mister, Mister, give him respect, because even a goy has acquired wisdom in his life. You when you talk to a goy, by the way, who's already over 70 years old, you see they understand things already better. They have a lot more clarity in life, because when they're younger, they're very they're wild. Like they go run over here, run over there. They're not yet settled.
Us.
You know what I mean? Right, but especially them, they're especially wild. But when it comes to their getting older, you already see, he knows what's God, he knows what's the Bible, he knows these things already. Everything is clear in his head, you know what I mean? He knows what's morality, he knows what's the proper way to behave, the improper way to behave, how to treat people. He's already got things, figured out in life. So therefore, you have to give him this respect. Treating him with respect, number one. And also another thing, they say, right, that if he needs to be supported, like his body, like he can't walk, so, help him to, hold his hand, to give him support. Support his body. If he needs to get across the street or something, he can't do it by himself, help him out, And this is a way, even to a goy, to give him kavod, to honor him because of his elderly status, right? That's the idea. People are, they have wisdom. That's the way it is. So, but as we said, right, when it comes to the Jew, you also have to rise as well. You have to, mitzvah to rise. So, as we said, the age comes at 70. So before that, even if he's like 69, still not, right? Once he reaches the age of 70, yes, now you have to rise for him, right? That's the way the rule works. Okay, we understand that. By the way, there's also another opinion, which is brought down the Arizal, which is the Kabbalah, Kabbalistic, So over there it says that 60 is the age of elderly, not 70, right? So the truth is that if you want to be machmir, if you want to be stringent, like the Arizal, so get up even for somebody who's 60, but the halacha is not like that. When we have machloket, when we have a dispute between the halacha and the Kabbalah, we do like the halacha, in general, right? That's the way it is. Unless the custom is not so. So therefore, what we do is that we do for 70. That's halacha. Beyond that, it's already piety. Saintliness, whatever you want to call it. Not required to do that. Okay, very good. Then we understand. So now, what about the chacham? Right. So the chacham, we're talking about somebody who is not old. It could be very young. Could be 18 years old. But since he's very learned in Torah already, so we have to get up before him. If he's very learned in Torah, even though he's not, he has no gray hairs, right? He has could be also he doesn't really have much of a beard or anything, He's just a regular looking person in terms of his body, but we're talking about his wisdom. So therefore, because of his wisdom, every person has to get up for him. How much wisdom does he have to have to get up for him? So the truth is that there's different ways of looking at the issue of what's a chacham. What does that mean to be a chacham? So some people think it means that, you got a job at some, shul, to make some money. They call you rabbi, That's not what it means to be chacham. Chacham means that you have Torah wisdom. You've studied Torah. So if a person is studying Torah, but he doesn't have a job as a rabbi, you still have to get up for him. But if he has a job as a rabbi, but he's amaretz, he doesn't know nothing, you don't have to get up for him. You know what I mean? So it depends on the situation. It depends on who he is and what he is, obviously, depending on his education. So how much wisdom does he have to have? Because it's all subjective. How much wisdom can you attain? Because the Torah, there's no end to it. There's no end to how much Torah that there is to learn. So who can learn the whole Torah? We're not talking about learning the whole Torah. So what does it mean to be a chacham? To be a elder in wisdom? Zaken, we call that. Zaken means that a person has enough knowledge to answer people on halacha. If they ask him a question, halacha about this, about marriage, about divorce, about right Pesach, about the holidays, about Shabbat, about all these kinds of things, whatever it may be, he can answer them the halacha, all practical halachot. So if a person has this kind of wisdom, we consider him already a Talmid Chacham. So therefore we have to rise. But the question is like this, right? When do you have to rise? I mean, you could be like 10 feet away from you, or 20 feet, or 100 feet away from you. When is the point that a person has to rise? So the rule is, in halacha, that for these people that we just mentioned, in general, we're talking about 4 amot. When they get to the point of 4 amot within your vicinity, which is about 6 feet, a little bit more than 6 feet. Once they get that close to you, you have to rise before them. That's the rule, right? Beyond that, you don't have to. But the exception is like this, right? When it comes to your parents, and for a big chacham, somebody who's like famous, big chacham, one of the gdolim, one of the big gdolei ador. He's one of the great chachamim of the generation. So like, my rabbi, Maran Alav Shalom, he was like that. He was one of the great. He was the greatest. So because of that, a person like that, you have to rise before him as soon as you see him, even though he's very far away. As soon as you spot him, you got to rise already to give him kavod, because he's one of the biggest chachamim of the generation, so he gets a special status. Same thing also applies to your parents as well. Once you see them already far away, you have to already rise before them. It doesn't matter if they're close or not. So then who do we say that have to be within you, 6 feet within you? We're talking about the elder, right, 70 years old, and also a regular chacham. What does that mean, regular chacham? He's chacham, but he's not one of the greatest of the generation. Or also he's not your personal chacham, the one who taught you most of your wisdom. Because if he's the one who taught you most of your wisdom, you have to rise also far away as well. So these are the conditions that we're talking about within these parameters. But there's also other things that a person has to know regarding the rising. As we said, right, that the people who are rising only halfway are making a mistake. So what does that mean? But there is actually some condition that a person only rises halfway. Like, just symbolic. It's called hidur, right? You give him like a little kavod, a little honor, but you don't have to get up all the way. What are we talking about? We're talking about, let's say, if you have two different rabbis, right, and they're both chachamim, about the same level, more or less. So they don't have to get up for each other all the way, because I'm like you, I'm not any less than you are. You're a chacham, I'm also a chacham. So therefore, they have to do like a little bit, kivud, a little bit hidur. That's what it's called, right? Hidur. We give him a little bit hidur. We get up a little bit. But he doesn't have to get up all the way, because he's also a chacham. Same thing also applies, by the way. There are cases like this, actually, that what happens is that a person has a parent, right? He has a father, and so he has to stand for his father. But there's also another factor, which is that he is his father's rabbi. In other words, he teaches his father Torah. In terms of Torah, he can put his father in his little pocket, He knows much more than him. But when it comes to the parent, the son, he's the parent, he's the son, right? So now what happens over here? One is the rabbi, and the other one is the parent. So who rises for who? Right? This is also another question. So the rule is over here that also they have to do they both have to get up here. Right? One has to stand because that's your rabbi, and the other one has to stand because it's your father. They both get up. That's the way it says in Shulchan Aruch. But there are cases where, right, they're like equal footing, as we said, right? Like two different rabbis who are like more or less equal. So they get up just a little bit, to show a little bit kavod to each other. They don't have to get up all the way, as we said. But there's also another case like that, which is, let's say, one person is an elder. He's over 70 years old, right? And the other one is a chacham, he's a rabbi. So who gets up for who? One is elder, the other one is chacham, but he's young. So here also they should get up a little bit for each other, like a little bit, for each other, just to show some respect for each other. One has wisdom, the other one has age, right? Age before beauty, as they say. Whatever it is, right? So they both have something, so therefore they both have to do a little bit to show respect for each other. That's the way it works, So there are priorities like this. Also another question which comes up regarding the issue of rising. So there are places where a person has to rise only a part of the way. But we're talking about where that other person also has something over you as well. They're more or less you're equal. One has this element, the other one has the other element, or they both have a certain level of wisdom. So they're both chachamim. So they have to do a little bit for each other as well to show kavod. Not all the way, but right. Then there are cases where people do this. Sometimes get up only halfway. They think if let's say he's not a chacham, so a chacham comes in, he thinks, oh, I'll just get up a little bit, for him. No, I have to get up all the way. If you understand all the way, there's a story, that brought down which is brought down in the book that I published like 10 years ago about honoring parents. I published a book about this 10 years ago. Did I ever give it to you? I think I gave it to you. Yeah, I think I gave it to you. So you may find it in your house somewhere. So what happens is that maybe not. I'm not sure. I gave. It's in the shul over here. They have it here. So anyway, the book talks about honoring your parents. So there's a story brought down which is very interesting. A funny story, right? There's a lot to learn from that story. Several halachot to learn from there. So they say, right, that there was two big chachamim in Jerusalem about 50 years ago. One of them was Rabbi Salman Mutzafi, and he was like a big Kabbalist from Iraq. And there was also another one, his name was Rabbi Tzadka Hussein, right? So these were two big rabbis, and so Rabbi Tzadka Hussein was teaching Rabbi Salman Mutzafi. He was young, he was a kid. And he was teaching him, he was his Rabbi, teaching him Torah, like you had a Chafetz Chaim over there, right? The rabbi over there. So he's teaching him, he comes every day to study with him. So what happens is that he's teaching him Gemara, Talmud. Gemara is Talmud, right? So he's teaching him Gemara, and so they learned in Masechet Kiddushin, the rule over there talks about the issue of rising for your parents, You have to get up for them when you see them, so forth and so on. So he taught him that you have to rise for your parents all the way, as we said, not halfway. So next day after they study this topic, kid comes in again, So he tells him, he says, let me ask you a question. Whatever I taught you yesterday, about rising for your parents, when your mother came into the room last night, did you rise for her? Did you do what I taught you? Well, you didn't do, right? So he tells him, he says, I have to admit, Rabbi, says, I only just went halfway. I didn't go all the way. I didn't go all the way up. He says, I have to admit to you, I don't want to lie to you. I cannot tell a lie, right? So, what the Rabbi tells him? Rabbi Tzadka Hussein. He tells him, he says, that's what you say? So he says, you know what? Let's close the Gemara. We're not going to continue anymore, right? He says, if you're not going to uphold what I teach you, what's the point of me teaching you then? That's what he told him, So he gave it to him. What kind of thing is this? You don't want to rise for your mother all the way, like I told you? You just halfway? What kind of thing is that? I taught you. What are we learning for? Just for theory we're learning? You have to uphold what you learn. You know what I mean? So he told them, he says, until you do teshuvah, we're not going to continue learning. So you see from there, by the way, there's also halacha regarding that. That when you have a talmid, when you have a student, right, and you see that the student is not keeping the things you teach him, so you should get rid of him, like kick him out. And tell him like this, right? What you do is like this. You tell a student, I see that you don't keep what I tell you, So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to kick you out now. And when you're going to be a good boy and do teshuvah, I'll take you back. Tell him that also. Because why? If you tell him, just get lost, he may think like, you threw him out forever. And become another Trotsky, right? Somebody like that, right? As we talked about. We don't want that. So we tell him, listen, we're going to throw you out, but when you become a good boy, we'll take you back. So this way he has a way to come back also. But the point is like this, right? That you're not allowed to teach somebody who's negligent, he just listens, but he doesn't do what you tell him, so what's the point of teaching somebody like that? The truth is, nowadays, it's a little bit different. You know why? Because the people that we're teaching over here, especially in this area, in America, they don't really know much, they have no experience, they have no background, with Judaism. So therefore, we're not so rough with them like that, you know what I mean? We're more forgiving with them. We let them slide a little bit, because they don't have any background. They don't know what Judaism is about. They don't really have the knowledge or the belief, the faith. They don't really have. They're lacking a lot of. So because of that, we sometimes let them slide, just to bring them close, Even though they're not really keeping what We teach them. But anyway, we don't kick them out because they were born into a family which is not religious. So what do you expect them now to become 100% religious in 2 months, in 2 years? It's not going to be like that. You know what I mean? It's going to take time. It may be a lifetime of work for him to climb up the ladder of keeping the mitzvot properly. So therefore, we don't do that today so much, unless you know the person is really, really, strong. Somebody who's got, the proper background, proper education, proper family orientation, whatever. That's something else. But you see from there that a person has to keep the Torah, not just as it says in Pirkei Avot, right? Lo adrashai ka'ela maaseh. You know what that means? The main thing is not to study. The main thing is to uphold what you study. That's the whole point. Okay, so getting back to what we said, right? As we said, that sometimes you have to get up for each other as well, depending on the situation. There's also another question which was asked regarding this issue, which is, how many times a day does a person have to get up for his rabbi or for his parents or for an elder, things like this? Every time they pass by you, you have to get up. That could be like, let's say, if you're in a house, your mother passes by you 20 times a day or more. Every time you have to get up for her, is that the way it is, right? So the truth is, according to Shulchan Aruch, according to Maran, you have to get up every time, right? Ashkenazim are a little bit more lenient regarding that.
Oh, really?
They're a little bit more lenient. Usually they're more stringent, right? In this case, they're more lenient.
Yeah,
That's the idea, right? So what does that mean? That there's a reason why they're lenient regarding that, because there is actually, right, regarding getting up for your rabbi, they say how many times you have to get up for your rabbi. So they say twice a day, right? Once in the day, once in the night, once in the morning, once in the evening, right? What's the reason for that? So it says in the Gemara, the reason is because we don't say Kriyat Shema, Shema Yisrael, more than twice a day, for God, So you shouldn't honor your rabbi more than you honor God. If you say Shema only twice a day, you shouldn't have to get up for your rabbi more than you honor God. And this is the reason why they say, don't get up for your rabbi more than twice a day, because you'll be honoring him more than God himself. But when it comes to parents, right, the Shulchan Aruch doesn't say like that. The Shulchan Aruch says you have to get up every time. So for parents, it's a different halacha. We don't learn from this halacha, the issue of the parents, because this halacha is related to the relationship between the rabbi and the God. Don't make your rabbi more than God. That's already too far, going too far. But when it comes to parents, since they're not really compared to God, in that sense, it's not really the same thing. So it's not really connected to that. So therefore, according to the Shulchan Aruch, a person has to get up 100 times a day. So then how would he, let's say he can't do that, right? It's too annoying for him. He's sitting there working, on the computer or whatever, doing something, He doesn't have time to get up every time parent passes by. So what should he do in a case like that? So there is a concept like this in Halacha, that if a father forgives his honor, or a rabbi, his honor is forgiven. So what does that mean? You can ask his father, right? Let's tell him like this. Abba, I'm sorry, but every time you pass by me 100 times a day, I can't get up every time. So will you forgive me, if I don't do that? And he'll forgive you, If he forgives you, then you can, you don't have to do it anymore.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So if it's too difficult, you can get forgiveness from the father, in order to alleviate the situation. So same thing with the mother, obviously, and same thing with the rabbi, for instance. Like, I'll give you an example. Let's say the rabbi, comes in at certain times, and you're busy, with something. You can't get up. So you ask the rabbi, do you forgive me? I can't always get up when you pass by. So will you forgive me? If he forgives you, he forgives you. That's the idea. So that's what a person has to do in order to alleviate this problem. Why? Because if he doesn't get forgiveness from them, the problem is that he's transgressing on the Torah. Because the Torah tells us you have to rise for Chacham, you have to rise for your parents, and you have to rise also for elders. You know what I mean?
So you're telling me every time Mark comes over there at the park, I have to get up now for that schmuck?
How old is he?
He just turned 70.
Yeah, but it seems to me that Mark has a problem with his observance. He's not really on par. So it may not be like that exactly.
Yeah, and even though he's
better than me. I don't know.
Even though
exactly.
he's acquired all this wisdom, he hasn't learned much, unfortunately. In 70 years. Yeah.
Right. That's the thing. So when you have somebody like that,
Yeah.
it's not exactly the same thing. But I guess we could put him in the category of a goy. You know, at least you should treat him with respect. Like
Right.
he's not only less than a goy.
Yeah. I told him to at least try to, this is what I ask Jews, the secular Jews. Forget about everything else. No, I'm not trying to make a chacham out of you. I'm far from that. Why do you have to eat pork? Like, what's in there that you must have? Like, can't you at least, observe that?
Yeah, right. It's like a despite kind of
Yeah.
attitude. It's
Like,
an attitude.
how good can it taste?
It's an attitude.
Yeah,
you
must
know?
you eat that?
Yeah, it's like carelessness. Like you just callousness.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
I'm just wondering. I've never tasted it, so I wouldn't know. But
Yeah.
is it?
By the way, sometimes the person tastes it, he doesn't even know, because he's eating things
yeah,
which
you
have pork.
could- right.
Like cold cuts.
Right.
Sometimes it doesn't say it's pork there.
Yes,
but it has
doesn't.
pork inside.
Yeah. So that's
You know what I mean?
That's another that reconfirms to me that it doesn't taste so amazingly odd or superior than anything else that you must, as a Jew, eat that shit. Excuse me, Rabbi.
Okay, I got the message. I got the idea.
Just
So-
it pisses me off.
I understand you. That's normal. Every person has its borders and limits. When it comes to these things. You don't go that far. That's as far as I go. I don't go further than that. That's the way it is. So everybody has got their limits. Everybody's got their moral code. Personal moral code. Like I wouldn't go that far. Like that's
Right.
You know what I mean? So that's the reason why there are issues like this. So as we said, right, that a person, if he needs to get forgiveness regarding this, he should take forgiveness, But if he doesn't really need it so much, let's say he only sees his rabbi like, once a day or twice a day, you should get up for him. Why? Why would you want to cancel your mitzvah? Because you're getting rewarded for that, for doing the mitzvah properly. So if it's something which is bearable, you should do it. Why ask him? Why ask him for forgiveness? You want to cancel out your mitzvah? You want to lose the reward for your mitzvah? Not a good thing to do, right? So therefore, a person has to get up. So this is the way a person has to treat the issue of getting up before elders and rabbis and parents. So as we said, right, regarding the distance as well, if it's a big chacham, that famous big chacham, everybody knows that he's a big chacham. So you have to get up even when you see him from far away. Let's say you went to the airport. You saw him like 100 meters away. 100 yards away. You still have to get up for him when So that depends on the situation, and also for your parents as well. But when it comes to, as we said, right, a regular chacham, who's not your particular chacham, he's not your rabbi who taught you most of your wisdom, or let's say he's not the big rabbi of the generation, but so then you just have to get up when he comes within 6 feet of you. Not all the way when you see him from far away or something like that, right? Not that much. Also the elder, the same thing, right? When he comes close to you only. You know what I mean? 6 feet. So then you have to stand up for him. Otherwise, you don't have to stand up. That's the idea, That's the way it works. How old is he, by the way?
Mark is 70.
Exactly 70? Yeah. Okay, very good. All right, so...
I took him to a diner for some pork.
Who took him?
The guys. No, we celebrated his birthday.
Oh my God. Pretty sick. Okay. Pretty sick.
That's what he eats. No, I'm joking. I don't know if he had pork that.
Yeah. Okay. Take him to a kosher place. You have to eat kosher.
Yeah.
It's not only the people don't realize sometimes that. Hi, Shalom. Come join us. Come. Hi.
Пожалуйста.
What did you order?
Кигали.
Oh, very good. Okay. So, very good. So, as we said, right, that what I wanted to tell you was that you shouldn't think, by the way, that eating pork is the only issue. Also, eating non-kosher, meat.
Absolutely.
You know that, right?
Yeah.
I don't have to tell you. Okay. The truth is that non-kosher meat can have more prohibitions than eating pork. Pork has only one prohibition, but non-kosher meat could have like 5 prohibitions.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. But with somebody like him, first you have to get him to stop eating pork. Then
Yeah, I
you
understand.
can-
I
you
understand. Sure, I understand.
It's so far-fetched for somebody
Of course,
like him to
of course,
start
of
keeping
course.
kosher.
Of course, I understand you. Okay, so very good. We discussed that a little bit. Baruch Hashem, thank God. There may be some things left over which I don't remember, but whatever. We'll take it. We'll take it there. But also there's another issue which we want to discuss, which is the issue of how do we formulate the halacha in our times. What does that mean? That, the problem is like this, right? That when the Sanhedrin, the high court, broke up, when the Jews went to exile, the problem is there was no more voting, there was no more majority concept over there. So the question is like this, right? If this rabbi says this halacha, that rabbi says something else, who do I listen to? You know what I mean? How do I know what's the halacha? How do I know who's right and who's wrong? This is the question. How do I know what's the halacha?
Yeah.
How does a person formulate the halacha? How do you do it? What's the way, the methodology, that a person has to do? So as we said, right, that when it comes to Sanhedrin, when they had the high court in the time of the temple that existed, they used to take a vote. They had 71 judges over there in the high court, and they would vote, and whoever had the majority, that would become the halacha. That was very simple, They would deliberate first, argue, try to convince each other, No, you're wrong, this, blah, blah, go back and forth, right? A couple of hours of deliberation, and then in the end, right, take a vote, and it went according to the majority. That's the way it was. But the problem is like this, right? That now we don't have a high court. So what does that mean? Those rabbis are not sitting together in one place. One is over there in France, one is over there in Spain, the other one is in Iraq, right? There's one over there in Israel, in Haifa, there's one in Jerusalem, there's another one over here. So who do we go? Like, who do we? How do we do that? What's the methodology? So the truth is that if you look at the writings of Maran Bet Yosef, Rabbi Yosef Karo, who was the one who wrote the Shulchan Aruch, which is the Jewish code of law, which is accepted Jewish code of law. He writes in his introduction to his work Bet Yosef over there. He said, right, that there are now several rabbis that have different rulings. So I want to write a book that unites everybody, into one camp, to have like a unified halacha for everybody. That's what he wanted to do. He was commanded by God to do this, by the way. He was chosen by God to do this. It wasn't just some kind of a coincidence, right? So what happens is like this, that he writes in the Bet Yosef, in the introduction over there, says, what do I do now? There's several different authorities that are saying several different things. We have the Rambam, we have the Rif, we have the Rosh, everybody's saying something else, right? That's the idea. So because of that, what do I do? How do I decide the halacha? He says, I don't have, so he said, you know what, I don't have the ability, the level, to decide which one of these rabbis is right or wrong. I don't have the ability to do that. I'm not on the level to do that. And the reason is, by the way, what's the reason why I said this, right? There's two reasons. Number one is because of humility. A person is supposed to be humble, This is the reason why he was chosen to write the Jewish code of law, because he was a humble man. Not only because he was smart. He was very smart. Very learned, but he was also humble. So what does that mean? His humility, how did it come out? How did it, how did it show? Because he said, we don't have anymore in our generation a way to decide who's right and who's wrong with those big rabbis who were before us. You know why? Because the concept is like this. In the Torah, there's a concept that the older rabbis are usually much bigger than the ones who are afterwards, the newer. So in terms of chronology, the ones who are closer to giving the Torah on Har Sinai of Moshe Rabbeinu, the ones who are closer to that generation are smarter. As we go on, the generations keep going down, they're going down. You know what I mean? So we're way, way, way down. So he said, I'm already down from these generations. I'm not on that level anymore. Humility, he admitted something which is true, somewhat. So he says, therefore, I'm not going to get into judging, like who's right and who's wrong. It's not my job to do that. So then how do I do it? So he said, I'll do majority, I'll count up the rabbis, the main rabbis, right? He felt that there was three main rabbis that he had to count up. The Rosh, the Rif, and the Rambam, those three rabbis, right? The Rambam was from Spain. And then he moved to Eretz Israel afterwards, right? He moved. And the Rif was in Morocco. That's where he lived, right? Another great rabbi. And the Rosh was living in Germany, and then he moved to Spain also, because they imported him over there. They needed a chief rabbi at that time, and they didn't have anybody. So they asked the Rosh to come from Germany and become the chief rabbi. So he became the chief rabbi of Spain afterwards. But he was originally from Germany. Ashkenazi, He was Ashkenazi. So what happened was that these three rabbis were considered to be the main rabbis according to the judgment of Maran Bet Yosef. So he said, I'm going to count up two out of three. 2 out of 3 ain't bad, right? So whoever is the majority, I'll make the halacha like that. That's the way he did it. That's the way he wrote the Shulchan Aruch. You know what I mean? With this system. There's also, by the way, other rabbis who ask on the system that he did. They say that the system was not correct, apparently. It was flawed. What's the flaw? They said the flaw is like this. Several things they mentioned. Number one, they said, okay, you want to do the majority, right? Okay, that makes sense, right? Majority is a very accepted thing in the world, right? Going according to the majority. Everybody does that. Democracy is based on that, except the dictatorships, right? We're not talking about China, right? And Russia. We're not talking about that. Yeah. Over there, there's only the fist majority. You know what I mean? The fist majority is the majority. That's something else. But when we're talking about democratic countries where there's a real majority, so there, it's a very accepted concept. But they said it's flawed. Some other rabbis. You know who said this? The Marshal, Rabbi Shlomo Luria, who was one of the big rabbis, Ashkenazi rabbis. He said that this system was flawed. So the reason why he said it was flawed is because when we say in the Torah that we go according to the majority of the rabbis, that applies only when they're all together sitting in one room, right? One bench. They're all together. So why does that matter that they're together? Because they can try to deliberate and can convince each other, argue with each other. And then they get to the truth by doing that. You know what I mean? That deliberation is what brings out the truth. So, but he said, but when you have rabbis from different generations who never saw each other, never met each other, different countries, it's not the same thing to make a majority like that. You know what I mean? They're not together in one place. That's not called majority. This is one of the reasons why they thought it was flawed, the system. One of the reasons. What's the other main reason? So it said that the other main reason is a different flaw. That you're talking about 3 different rabbis, right? You're making a majority, the Rif, the Rosh, and the Rambam. But there's so many other rabbis also that were around in the medieval times, which are called the Rishonim, the earlier authorities. We have the Ran, we have the Tosfot, we have the Rashba, we have the Ritva, and many, many more, right? We have Rashi, and many, many more, right? There's no end to it, right? The Ramah, Yad Ramah, and we have Rabbeinu Tam, and we have the Ri, and we have all these many, many, many rabbis. So they said, why did you pick Dafka, precisely these 3 rabbis? What about all the others? What kind of majority is that? You know what I mean? So because of these 2 reasons, and probably also more, they thought that the system was flawed.
Now,
Yeah.
Was that an opinion or some wisdom or some higher power told them that this system was flawed? And
Because what they're doing is like this, right? He's comparing the original system to what we have today. It's not the same thing.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Because when you had 70 rabbis in one court, which was the high court, 71 rabbis, over there, number one, they were together in one place. This was a condition that they had. And also there was another issue, which is that there was more than just 3 rabbis. You're taking 3 rabbis and excluding the other ones. But in the high court, we had 70 rabbis. This is also another reason why they thought that the system was flawed. So, what turned out in the end, right? What came out of all this, right? Bottom line.
Yeah.
The bottom line was that the system of the Maran Bet Yosef, that wrote the Bet Yosef, was accepted in the end, even though these flaws were noted, but in the end, there was, why? Why is it? Even though that their questions regarding these flaws are correct somewhat, you know what I mean? They're saying the truth. It's not exactly the same thing. But nevertheless, it's like we have no choice. You know why? Because we can't put these rabbis together in one room. There's no way to do that. They were living in different countries, different times, different time periods. The only way we can do it is by uniting them and, deciding the majority. This is not really the 100% correct way, but we have no choice, so, you know what they say, right? Et la'asot Hashem, eferu Toratecha. You know what that means? When it's time to do something, sometimes we have to break the Torah. What does that mean? It's not exactly the way the Torah wanted, that there should be a majority like this. Different generations, different places, different times. But we have nothing else to do to rely on. So we have to take it whatever we do the best we can, with the resources that we have. So therefore, this is the reason why they decided to do this way. Maran. So what happened was that in the end, once Maran wrote his works, the Bet Yosef, the Shulchan Aruch, and the Kesef Mishnah, and all these works, they were accepted in Am Yisrael. So what does that mean? He united all these various opinions into one cohesive opinion, and it was pretty much accepted amongst the Jewish people, except the Ashkenazim, right, who did it a little bit differently. What they did was that they had their own customs, which were not exactly in line with this kind of system. So therefore, they wrote a gloss to Ramah, the Rabbi of the Ashkenazim, wrote a gloss in the Shulchan Aruch in order to compensate for that difference. That now we have, what do we have over here? We have the Shulchan Aruch, we have the Ramah, so we have the custom of the Sephardim, we have the custom of the Ashkenazim. So pretty much all together in one book. So it pretty much covers everything. Okay, so that's pretty much the way it was done 500 years ago. That the whole system was united like this. By the way, what's the reason? We already said, right, that one of the flaws that was mentioned in the system is that he didn't include all the rabbis. He just included only 3. What about all the other ones? So what I told you was that we do the best we can, but here you could have included them also. Why didn't you include them? Well, there was impossible to include them. Why did you only include 3 rabbis? This is the question, right? So what he writes in the Bet Yosef, the reason why he only took these 3 is because the customs of these rabbis spread all over the world, like they were accepted. In other words, the communities in the respective places that they lived in accepted these rabbis. So therefore, they became like the authority, the accepted authority. Right? So how did it work? The way it worked was like this, right? That the Rosh, who was in Europe, as we said, right? He was in Germany, then he moved to Spain. So he was pretty much accepted in Europe, his rulings were accepted in Europe. So he was like very well accepted in the European areas. Therefore he carries a lot of weight, a lot more than some other rabbi who wasn't accepted like that. And also the Rambam, he was accepted where? He was accepted in Eretz Israel and all the surrounding areas, right? The Middle East, Syria, Iraq, right? Lebanon, all these areas, Egypt, Israel itself, right? All the surrounding countries over there. Turkey, right? All these surrounding countries, right? They all accepted the Rambam because that's where he lived, the Rambam. So he was like the big shot over there.
Yeah.
So he was the most accepted over there in the Middle East. What about the Rif? The Rif, as we said, right, he was in Morocco. So he was accepted in North Africa, in the African areas. He was in Africa. So all the Jews who lived in that area, the Eastern Jews, they were doing like the Rif. So therefore he said, since these rabbis are the most accepted, I'm going to take them over all the others who were not so accepted. This is the reason why he didn't take the other rabbis in account. But, right, just to make an exception, to make a caveat, the way it works is like this. And even though those rabbis were not put into the count, but nevertheless, what happens is like this, right, that they say, some of the Mefarshim, some of the rabbis, they say that really the truth is, when you take the Rif and the Rosh and the Rambam, you are really including all the opinions of all the rabbis. You know why? Because they saw all those opinions. They weeded out all the bad opinions, the ones that they thought were not correct. So they already did this job of sifting out the false opinions, whatever, not false, but the ones that are not accepted so much. So therefore, right, since they already saw that and everything was available to them, so therefore when you take them, it's like you're taking everybody because they already sifted out everything. They did all the sifting. And this is the reason why Maran Bet Yosef, this is the way he went. So therefore the Shulchan Aruch was accepted in Halacha, in the Bet Yosef. It was all written by Maran Rabbi Yosef Karo in Spain. He also moved to Eretz Israel afterwards. So what happened was that, but now, right, things are a little bit different. Why is that? Because after that period, already 500 years have passed by. And there have been also many other rabbis who wrote many other opinions, which are against the Shulchan Aruch. In other words, it started again, this whole mess that, like conglomeration of opinions here, there, again, right? It started to be a mess again.
Yeah.
So the question is, what do you do now? Once you have so many opinions, right? So the truth is also now as well, we heavily rely, there's several things that we rely on. Number one is that we rely on the fact that the Shulchan was accepted by, Shulchan Aruch was accepted by all the Jewish people in most areas, in all the areas of the world. So therefore, we say, right, the Shulchan Aruch has more authority than any other works in Halacha, which came after him. Because those works were not accepted by everybody. So therefore, we do take them into consideration, but the Shulchan Aruch is more authoritative than all those other works, as a rule. So what does that mean? Rabbi Yosef Karo for the Sfaradim, the Ramah for the Ashkenazim, they're both in Shulchan Aruch. So therefore, the main custom, the main rule of the Jews, the main law is the Shulchan Aruch. Nowadays, this is the way we go. So, what does that mean? That if there are many later authorities that argue with the Shulchan Aruch, we say, you know what? We accepted the rulings of the Shulchan Aruch, even though there are as many that are against it. So with the Sfaradim, we're very particular about that. We accepted the rulings of the Shulchan Aruch. So if even many rabbis come to argue with the Shulchan Aruch, 100,000, whatever it is, right? We don't listen to them because we accepted it upon ourselves, something which was accepted. The Ashkenazim, they're a little bit more light with this. What does that mean? That they have room a little bit to maneuver and to go against the Shulchan Aruch sometimes. Because they consider that they can sometimes argue with the Shulchan Aruch. But you know what it is? That there's a book called En Yitzchak that was written by the chief rabbi, the son of my rabbi, and he writes over there, he brings over there 130 separate works, sources that say that we accepted the rulings of the Shulchan Aruch, and therefore it's considered to be the most authoritative opinion that there is out there. It's not like just one vote. It's the main vote because it was already accepted by the Jews.
Yeah.
So therefore, the only way we go against the Shulchan Aruch is if there's a custom, like clear custom, to do that in that community, in that country, that they don't do like the Shulchan Aruch, because the rabbis of that country told them not to do that way. You should know, by the way, that there's also rule of customs. Sometimes there are customs, minhagim, and the rule is that when it comes to customs, many poskim write this, brought down with several poskim, Rishonim and Achonim, earlier authorities, later authorities. What they say is that a custom only has power if it's accepted by everybody in the community, the whole community, not 50-50. It's 50-50, that's not obligatory as a custom. It doesn't obligate you. Only if it's 100%. Number one. Number two, the custom has to be enacted by the rabbis, not by the ignorant people, ignorant people. If they made a custom, we don't have to keep that. So what does that mean? A person has to find the source of the custom. Sometimes the source could be very good. It came from the rabbis, came from the chachamim, the leaders of the community. Sometimes it comes from the riffraff, Erev Rav, the lowlives. They made some kind of stupid custom. They say, oh, that's our minhag, Shoni minhagia, Oh, yeah. But that's what you're doing is stupid, It's against the halacha. So in a case like that, where it's something which is against the halacha, the custom, there's no justification for that custom. It wasn't made by it wasn't made by the rabbis. It wasn't made by the leaders. So what we do is we nullify the custom. We nullify it. Right? That's the idea. Because you have to, this is like you have to. Every generation there has to be rabbis who come along and weed out, the bad customs that, the garbage, that was made, garbage customs. The things which are ridiculous, against the halacha, against the sources, against everything. So when it comes to bad customs, the leaders of that generation have to come and uproot them. This is what my rabbi did, by the way. He uprooted many customs which he felt were not proper, improper, sinful even, right, or just not logical, or against the tradition, right? All kinds of things like this. He uprooted many, many customs that were very prevalent before he came along, the rabbi, Rabbi Shalom. This way it made him controversial, by the way. This thing, You know what I mean? The people were angry. How you come and uproot our customs?
I read about that.
Yeah, you mentioned
Even
it.
some statements that he made were controversial.
Right, that's also true. That's a different story. That's a different lecture, right?
Yeah.
Right. But the point is that he did a job like this where he really, sifted out all the bad stuff and he left only the good. So he did a great job, by the way.
Yeah.
The rabbi was unbelievable genius, nobody like him. Probably, from the time of the Rambam and Maran Yosef, Rabbi Yosef Karo, there was nobody like him. We're talking about 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago. Nobody like him on that level in halacha. So because of that, what he did was in his books, he made like also a rule of majority. So because of his vast knowledge, he used to bring like sources from all the books. Here, there. So in one statement, one essay, he would bring like 400 sources. And make a majority. Some kind of majority over there also as well, as we said, right, with the rules of halacha. So what does that mean? That the concept of majority is still considered to be a very central theme. What does that mean? Let's say there are also things which the Shulchan Aruch didn't deal with them. Yeah. They didn't write the Shulchan Aruch about this topic. Something new that came up, right? A new technology, a new situation, right, which wasn't around before. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So, like Tesla. Tesla is something new. So the rabbis have to tell us, okay, so what is the rule about driving a Tesla on Shabbat? What is it allowed? Not allowed? Is it rabbinical? Is it from the Torah? You have to, right? Or another example, right? LED lights, right? LEDs. Is that like lighting a fire, or it's not a fire? What is that? Is that a fire LED, or is it just some kind of chemical reaction? These things have to be. So here also, the rule of majority applies very, very strongly, which things when it comes to especially when it comes to things which are not mentioned in the Shulchan Aruch. That we go according to the majority. But also a person has to use his sechel as well, right, as his intellect. What does that mean? The rabbi also, besides the majority, he has to know the rules of how to deliberate in halacha. From his experience, from learning a very long time, this gives them the tools to properly deliberate. So sometimes you can deliberate in a way that will cause him to argue with others. That's okay, as long as he knows how to do it. It's considered to be legitimate. He's an expert in that. He's studied a long time, and he received ordination to be a posek, to be a halachic ruler, somebody who rules in halacha. He's allowed to rule in halacha, even against the others. But the truth is, right, that when it comes to the issue of majority, so there a person should try to not argue with them when there's a clear majority of rulings against what he thinks is the right thing. Sometimes the proper thing to do, is just to bow to them, and say, listen, I don't agree, but since they're the majority, and these were big rabbis, so I'm gonna just wave to them. I'm gonna yield to them.
Thank God. Thank God the majority didn't count in Hillary's case.
Popular vote. Yeah, I got you. Okay, so you're right about that. It may happen again, by the way, the same thing. You never know.
She's predicting it, actually.
She's predicting it, right? Okay. But I think this time it's going to be even worse for them. It's going to be worse.
Yeah.
This time they're going to lose big time.
Yeah.
Because they have two losers. So two wrongs don't make a right. That's what I say about them. Two wrongs don't make a right. That's what I say about these candidates. Okay, so what I want to tell you is that there's a funny Gemara about this, right? The Rabbi Al Shalom Maran, when he would see a rabbi who would rule against the majority, he would like criticize them, like not to do that. Even though technically speaking they could, because they know how to do it. But nevertheless, you should take into account that there's so many people who argue with you, they don't agree with you. So there must be a reason for that. Especially when those people were like bigger than you, a little bit in the former generations. So a person has to be mindful of that. The rabbi was very, very adamant about this rule, that a person should still go according to the majority. Not all the rabbis agree with this, by the way. Some rabbis, especially in the Ashkenazi world, still have the chutzpah to go against the majority. I'll tell you something funny, and we'll end with this, right? That there's Gemara in Masechet Yevamot. Over there's a funny story. Whatever, I don't know if it's funny, but interesting story about Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Akiva, what happened was that he went to a certain place. He was sent over there, like as an emissary. To be a rabbi there, he's going to take questions from people. Like to educate them. To answer questions. So he was sent somewhere, and so they asked him, several questions, and he answered everything. Then they asked one final question, and it was really dependent on something, right? It was depending on this concept of who's the halacha like, right? Bet Hillel or Bet Shammai. If you looked at my posts yesterday, you saw I posted on that. I posted on Facebook and on the WhatsApp regarding this issue of, the Gemara talks about this, right? In Masechet Eruvin, that there was two schools of thought, right? In time of the Second Temple, Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel, and they had arguments. They couldn't decide several things, so they stuck with their arguments. There was no court to decide who was right and who was wrong. Sometimes, So because of that, these arguments stayed, and for a while, and then they finally did decide. But what happens? It says in Gemara like this, right? That for 3 years in Eruvin, they had arguments. Bet Shammai, Bet Hillel. They couldn't decide who was right, who was wrong. Each one says, "I'm right, you're wrong." So what happened was that finally a voice came from heaven. Heavenly voice came out and said, "Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim chaim." They're both the words of the living God, but halacha is like Bet Hillel, house of Hillel, right? So the Gemara asks over there, right? Obvious question, If both they're saying the words of living God, so then why is the halacha like Bet Hillel? What's the reason? Why, they're more handsome? What's the reason? They have a better smile? They're more politically correct? Why would you want to say that? So the Gemara says over there a reason, right? It says because they were more humble than Bet Shammai. They had more humility. So where's the humility, right? How does it show? How is it displayed, the humility? Because what they used to do, Bet Hillel, was they argued with Bet Shammai, but before they argue with him, they would first learn his opinion and study it, and deliberate on it, to see if it's right, analyze, And they would first study that opinion, and then if they didn't agree, right, so before formulating their own opinion, they studied the opinion of the competing school, of the adversary. They were more humble. Humility, right? There's also another thing, which is that they used to teach their opinion before their own, to give them kavod, to give them respect. They would first say, okay, Bet Shammai says like this, right? And we say the opposite. So they gave them the respect of mentioning their opinion as well. And not only that, mentioning it first. So they say from there, right, Gemara, it says, if you look at my post, you'll see there, right, that from here we learn that a person who humbles himself, HaKadosh Baruch Hu elevates him in the end, A person who tries to elevate himself, to be like a demagogue, some kind of, self-proclaimed icon, Hashem humbles him, puts him down. He doesn't like people who stick their nose up in the air. You know what I mean? Because you have to be humble in this world. That's the way it is. So Bet Hillel was more humble than Bet Shammai. So therefore, halacha began again. So they asked Rabbi Akiva, right, this question. When he came to that town to teach them Torah, they said, in this particular case that they were talking about, who's the halacha like, right? Is it like Bet Hillel or Bet Shammai? So he told them, he said, halacha is like Bet Hillel, right? In almost every case, halacha is like Bet Hillel. This is the rule. In the Gemara, it's brought down, Masechet Brachot. They say, by the way, something very strong over there, Masechet Brachot. What they say? That if you do like Bet Shammai, a person does like against Bet Hillel, he's liable to death. That's how strong it is. Can you imagine? That's how strong they made it. So, anyway, what happened was, they said, halacha is like Bet Hillel. So they told him, they said to Rabbi Akiva, they said, but we heard from you, we heard about you, that you go like Bet Shammai. You're a Bet Shammai fan. You're not a Bet Hillel guy. So he told them, he said, no, you're mistaken. He says, that's not me. Maybe you heard a rumor, but the rumor you didn't hear correctly. So he says, you know what? It's not me, it's my brother. So he says, I have a younger brother. His name is Yonatan, right? And he goes like Bet Shammai. So he says, he calls him, he says, Bechor Satan. You know what that means literally? Bechor Satan. Firstborn Satan. Mm-hmm. Go figure what that means, right? But the point was like this, right? He gave him like a nickname like this. What does that mean? Something like derogatory over here. What does that mean? So he says he doesn't care about the majority. Whatever he feels is right, he does.
Putin. The other one, the other schmuck in Korea is in a coma.
Yeah, there's a rumor. Is it really true? That's the question.
Yeah.
He's in bad shape.
He has,
Believe me, if he dies, we should all make a party. Believe me, this guy. He's a tyrant. This guy.
Yeah.
Big tyrant.
Yeah.
Very wicked man. Very evil man. Big sinner. Terrible.
What do you think about when Trump went there to meet him?
He tried, he didn't succeed all the way because You know, his whatever, but
Yeah.
he tried, whatever.
Yeah.
It's a whole story, about that. Whatever, but the point is like this, right? He says, but this, my brother, he says, he doesn't care about majority, whatever he thinks is right does. And this is why he goes like Bet Shammai. He says, that's not me, it's my brother. So what do we see from there, by the way? We see that it's not good to be like that in the Gemara, it teaches you a moral lesson. You should be mindful of the majority. Don't just come out and argue with everybody, especially when you're like a small minority. Like you're one and they're like 20. It's like, come on, you think you're smarter than everybody? Like, don't be so arrogant. This is not the way, not the proper way. Technically speaking, you could do it. If you're trained to do it, you know how to do it. But it's not the proper way. Not the proper path. It's arrogant, it's not humility. You know what I mean? I'll tell you something funny, right? That my rabbi, Maran Shalom, he used to have an argument with a certain rabbi, a big rabbi. His name was Sternbuch, he's still alive. Rabbi Sternbuch. He's also big Chacham, Ashkenazi, So what happened was that Rabbi Sternbuch, he wrote in his book something like, derogatory about the rabbi, He tried to criticize him. You know what I mean? So, you know what he said, right? He said that, there was one big rabbi in Ashkenazim, his name was Chazon Ish. So he said that if Rav Ovadia, the rabbi, argues with the Chazon Ish, he's considered to be like a rebellious sage, like somebody who rebelled, So the rabbi, was very sharp. So once he heard that he said that about him, he wrote that in his book. So he said, I'll tell you something about this rabbi. He says, Rabbi Sternbuch. Right? So he says, he is exactly like what it says in this Gemara that we just mentioned, right? There are people like this who go against the majority, even though they're minority. So he's just like that. This rabbi, he says. So he says, it says over there, Rabbi Akiva said about his little brother, Bechor Satan, right? Like this was what he called him. So he says, you take those letters, comes out Sternbuch, his name. Same exact spelling. So he got him back pretty good, right? That was a funny retort that he did, the rabbi. He was very funny. He was very witty, He was able to do his witty jokes. He was a very, very intelligent man. So what happened was, right, that we see from there, the rabbi was true to his philosophy. He felt that when it comes to the majority, when there's a clear majority, you have to yield. Even though you don't agree with that, that was his humility. And that's why his rulings were accepted, by the way. Today in the world now, his rulings are very accepted. The Sephardi world especially. But the Sephardim, why is that? Because he had humility. He used to learn everybody else's opinion before he formulated his own. Even people who were much younger than him and much more inexperienced, and there was Talmidim, there was disciples. Even the disciples, what they wrote, he used to read that before he formulated his own halacha. This is the way of the humility, So you see from there two things, right, in halacha that are very important to know. One is majority, one is humility. Those two things, if a person has care for these two things, he's on the right path in halacha, more or less, you know what I mean? But when a person goes against humility, he's arrogant, he doesn't care about the majority, I know, they're all wrong, I'm all right, they're all wrong. 100%, 100 of them are wrong, I'm right, I'm the only one, but I'm right. 100 against 1, you're right? What's the chances of that? You know what I mean? Be realistic. I mean, come on, Be a little bit, exercise a little bit, humility. That's the way it should be, right? Do you want to do that? Bechor Satan, right? That's what you are. That's what they call it. Okay, so there's one thing I just want to mention. We'll finish, right? Regarding this, the Zohar Kadosh, which by the way has the deepest, conception of these things, of all the Torah. When you read the Zohar Kadosh, you get the deepest element of the Torah, the secrets. The more esoteric. So it says something over there amazing, the Zohar Kadosh, regarding the machloket between Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai. We talked about this, right? So we said halacha is like Bet Hillel, and we mentioned in the Gemara what's the reason why? Because they were humble, they had humility. But the Zohar Kadosh doesn't say like that. You know what it says? The Zohar Kadosh says the reason why halacha is like Bet Hillel. You know why? Not like Bet Shammai. Because Bet Hillel is always lenient in general. Bet Shammai is always stringent in general, right? So it says the Zohar Kadosh, when it comes to halacha, you have two different camps, right? Both big rabbis. We're not talking about ignorant people, right? Like, these guys over here, right? We're not talking about that. But we're talking about big rabbis, this one says this, where this one says that. So says the Zohar Kadosh, it's a mitzvah always to make the halacha like the lenient opinion. What's the reason why? So it says the Zohar Kadosh, the reason is because HaKadosh Baruch Hu, runs the world with two elements, with judgment, din, and chesed, kindness. So the lenient opinion is kindness, and the stringent opinion is judgment, strict judgment. You understand? So HaKadosh Baruch Hu runs the world with both things, but he wants one to be higher than the other. So which one does he want to be higher than the other? He wants kindness to be higher than strict judgment. Otherwise the world couldn't exist. Everybody would die, right? For their sins. So therefore, it says in Zohar Kadosh, it's a mitzvah to make always like a lenient opinion, the halacha. And this is the reason why halacha is like, what? Like Bet Hillel and not like Bet Shammai. Right? The truth is, right, that they say in the Gemara that the Bet Shammai, they were more wise than Bet Hillel. They were wiser. But nevertheless, right, kocha deheter adif. What does that mean? That the strength of the leniency is better. If you have a way to be lenient, it's better to be lenient. As long as you have a normal way to do it, right? A legitimate way, not a silly way, right? Not an ignorant way, like these jokers over do. We're not talking about that. So this is the whole thing. So now we understand also in our times, right? It says the Chidah, by the way, Maran Chidah, one of the great rabbis. He says that continuing that line of Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel nowadays, this is the Ashkenazim and Sfaradim. Because the Sfaradim are usually lenient, Ashkenazim are usually more stringent. So he says the Ashkenazim are continuing Bet Shammai, and the Sfaradim are continuing Bet Hillel. That's the way he says it. So the quality of the Sfaradim is kindness, quality of the Ashkenazim is strict judgment. You understand? You need both things in the world, by the way. The world cannot exist without both. But the point is that it says in Zohar Kadosh that the kindness has to be above strict judgment. So therefore the halacha has to be like Bet Hillel. So therefore, according to that, this is why you see, by the way, that these major works in halacha were written by Sfaradim. The Rambam, the Shulchan Aruch, which are the most accepted works in halacha, because they were Sfaradim, and they were more lenient. You understand?
Any contributions by the Ashkenazi?
So Maran, Rabbi Shalom, he was also Sephardi, also lenient. So again, we see the same thing, right? That whatever the Zohar Kadosh says is fulfilled until this day. That what? The halacha should be always like the lenient opinion. This is what we want. We want Bet Hillel in this world. Because otherwise, strict judgment is going to be higher than kindness, and people can't live like that. It's too strict. It's too constraining. It's like the people that tell you, wear a mask, when you 24 hours a day. Who can wear a mask 24 hours a day? They'll choke you, man. You can't breathe. You can't get oxygen like that.
Yeah.
It's not a healthy way to live like that. Very unhealthy, By the way, what we see, right? That these people who tell, the ones who are the biggest, supporters of masks, they're the ones in private who don't wear masks. They cheat. They're the biggest cheaters. Like in Israel, they've been like arresting people for that now recently. And they just had a meeting, like in the left-wing party over there, blue and white. And they were all without masks. They caught them, Yeah. They're the ones who talk about it, they advocate it, and they're the biggest cheaters. Biggest hypocrites, these people, you should know. So, this whole mask thing, I'll tell you something, it's a bluff. The whole thing is a big bluff.
Absolutely.
Baruch Adonai le'olam, amen, amen. Chazak u'baruch. God bless you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. This was a great,
all the blessings.
enlightening lecture. I just want to see, because I don't understand.